Biblical theology is different than systematic theology. It's where you look at the syntax, lexical meaning, the historical significance, the theological significance. We're going to look at the geographical significance, and we're going to put all of that study and research together to come up with the intended meaning of the text, so that our students will be able to fall in love with the Word of God, and not just what it means, but how it means it. You know, for example, in Genesis 32, one of my favorite chapters, but it's filled with structure and symmetry. But at the very beginning of chapter 32, it all of a sudden, the structure ceases until you get to the last verse, and it talks about that Israel does not eat the sinew of the thigh, which is upon the hip socket, because he touched the hip socket, which is upon the sinew of the thigh, until this day. And when I first studied that, I thought, wow, that doesn't make sense. Why would they give a dietary restriction at the end of this amazing chapter of this fight scene between Jacob and God, where Jacob had to finally give in to God, where God said, you know, let me go, for the day approaches. You know, Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And Jacob was learning the most important lesson there is that if you want God's greatest blessing, then you have to be willing to embrace some of the greatest pain. That's what Jacob was going through. He just had his hip dislocated. You know, and God said, let me go. And Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And that's what we're teaching here at Lamplighter with our students. We're teaching them that if you want God's greatest blessings, then you got to be willing to pay a price. And so theologically, practically, we want them to experience that unless you're willing to add to your faith virtue, knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, brotherly kindness, and love, you're going to accept second best, third best, fourth best. We want God's best for these students. We want them to experience God on a level that when they wake up in the morning, they can't wait to get started, because it's a new day with God, new air to breathe, new visions to embrace, new disciplines to engage with, new knowledge to find. You know, we want them to be excited about everything that happens in their lives, because it's a new day with God. So that passage in Genesis, we come to this dietary restriction, and it says, the children of Israel don't eat the sinew of the thigh, which is upon the hip socket, because he touched the hip socket, because they did not eat the sinew of the thigh, which is upon the hip socket. And it's like, what does that mean? And as I looked at it, it's a poetic device where it's framed, and it's got hip socket, sinew of thigh, because he touched, sinew of thigh, hip socket. And that framing device, that perfectly matching themes of hip socket and sinew of the thigh, with hip socket and sinew of the thigh on both ends, in the very center it has this phrase, because he touched. And that phrase was God's ending to this amazing battle in Jacob's life, recognizing that all his life he has been fighting against God and against man. He has tried to get pleasure and fulfillment out of getting a second wife, pleasure and fulfillment out of having more children, pleasure and fulfillment out of getting greater flocks, pleasure and fulfillment of getting more from his extended family, pleasure and fulfillment by getting his father's blessing, pleasure and fulfillment by getting his brother's birthright. He's been getting everything from other people and losing his relationship with God in the very center, because he touched. And for the first time in Jacob's life, he recognized that it was God touching his life. God was removing things from his life so that he would recognize that his greatest fulfillment is not holding on to these other things, but holding on to God himself. So that when God finally gave him that ultimatum, let me go, or the pain will be greater, or I'll bless you, Jacob finally said, I will not let you go. You can give me all the pain that you want. I'm going to embrace the pain, because I'm going to receive your greatest blessing. And that's when God finally blesses Jacob. That's what we want our students to learn here.